Afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to have Tara Jones and Abid Patel here to talk about all things digital safeguarding. And it's great to have people who are sort of from different sides of the desk. Abid with his experience as an IT director and Tara as a former head. So I'm sure that it's going to be a great session. I'm conscious that it's a cold Thursday evening and you don't want to hear from me. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Tara. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. And we're very pleased to be having this conversation with you, myself and Abid. And we can I think, should we get into introductions as we flow rather than doing that? But you'll get to know what we both do and what our roles are. The goal for the session really, and I'll just move us over there into the corner. Key takeaways in case you have to drop. I know it's, late and we're in autumn too. What a half term. But we want to really think about this need for a joined up approach to cybersecurity, protecting students' identities, their digital identities, and then some tips for digital safety as a group project. So if anyone does have to drop, Alicia, you're going to kindly share a recording and we'll make sure that there are some takeaways to follow up with. But the big conversation that we want to have with you today, is this being prepared and cybersecurity, and a conversation that I suppose Abid and I have had as a friendly conversation and at events we've been to, and that led us to believe this needed to be a wider conversation and a webinar, was this point around collaboration and kind of equipping everyone and using technology. So I work with a company called Clever. Clever are predominantly in the US, with nearly 80% of schools there. So a big company within the US, and we've been working with UK schools and internationally this past year. But the data you can see here does come out of our cybersecurity report. And that surveyed over kind of 800 district leaders, so local authority, that sort of size groups and groups of schools. We spoke to lots of leaders and educators, and we were interested and wanted to know about cybersecurity responsibility. And this absolutely is where you come in, Abid, because of course, as an IT director, I'm interested to know your take on that. What we're seeing here, of course, is this cybersecurity primarily falls to the IT department's responsibility. What's your experience of that in your role?
Thanks, Tara. And firstly, it's great to be joining you today, because this very much is something that I'm very passionate about, but also a very poignant discussion and worrying subject really for schools and businesses around the world. And you're absolutely right. Historically, anything there's a running joke that if it has a plug, it's my responsibility. And the plugs have moved out into the cloud, as they say. So we're having fewer and fewer systems within the organization, within the building. You don't have the tin, as they call it, anymore, in the form of servers in an awful lot of schools, and a lot of that stuff is in the cloud. And so it's becoming more and more sort of distant but complicated at the same time. And so the minute it gets complicated, you hear that constant analogy, oh, it's over my head. I don't know. I leave it to them geeks who sit in the dark corner over there, sort of thing. And I think the recent changes in the last couple of years through the Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance from the or requirements from the Department of Education kind of showed with web filtering and monitoring that historically this was always something that was sort of left to the IT teams, and they kind of got on with it, and the schools were just, well, yes, our connections are safe and secure for the children, making sure they're not going to get into, but it was kind of just parked with those teams. And the Department of Education turned around and said, no, schools, DSLs, safeguarding teams have to have ownership and authority over this and understanding over it. I think we're in that same place now with cybersecurity, or we are definitely in that same place now with cybersecurity, where it's still very much an IT responsibility, and it's still very much seen as a, you know, them lot over there deal with it. We just know that we need to, or some of us know that we need to have complex passwords, and it isn't that simple. We constantly hear the phrase safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. Cybersecurity is also everyone's responsibility. And without that, you'll never be as secure as you want to be.
Yeah. Anyone would think you knew the next slide that was coming there, Abid, because it's absolutely the conversation. It's that protecting cybersecurity. It does. It takes all of us, and education and cybersecurity, they can no longer be working independently or separately. We know now how much is at stake. I'm just thinking, told you, Abid, I've got IT report. I'm thinking how support on the call. How best to have the video, because I know you're recording, Alicia, so that it's not on the slides. If I just minimize it. Oh, there we go. This is a good point. You know, you said we'd be talking about in front of the desk and behind the desk, IT and educators. I'm arguably that person you talked about, Abid, who would say, oh, this goes over my head. I've got a great, strong IT team. I don't need to be as engaged with that. And it's through my role with Clever and working with schools on digital strategy that I've come to recognise how important it is for the educator to be working with the IT team and for this collaboration, because we know what's at stake, our student data, and quite often what we're looking at from Clever's perspective is credentials and digital identities. And it was really interesting to see that that was the entry point, and this vulnerability around the student identity, that of course is the responsibility of the curriculum, the classroom, the teachers, to think about how we're protecting those identities. We've got an example here actually to share, to think about exactly how it can happen and sort of some of the impact. So this was again coming out of that report and broadly publicised, it's what it says under there, from one of the largest districts in the US. And this was a hacking through a student account. So it says there how this happened. You know, it was a large school district was a victim, and we saw it through this access point and compromised credentials. The impact and the true cost. And of course, what we're perhaps not seeing there also is parents were emailed via the student accounts to say, you know, accounts have been compromised. There's obviously reputation for a huge district across the states, and understanding this is a very serious risk. I mean, this first part of the webinar is what we wanted to do, was outline the problem. What's your take on what's happened here, Abid?
I think, you know, it just speaks to lack of understanding with the way we use systems. I think, having worked in education for 20 years, I still see, you know, every member of staff that comes in, we go through rigorous induction processes of, here are our safeguarding policies and our health and safety policy and this policy, that policy, and this is the way we do things, and staff code of conduct and all of that. And there's an assumption, and probably a wrong assumption, especially now as we're sort of seeing more and more early careers teachers coming into schools, where these people are born in the digital age, and so therefore they just know how to use the systems. And I think that's a really dangerous assumption that we're making in schools. And the fact of the matter is the lack of training is probably where an awful lot of these things happen. So you could argue facetiously that we really shouldn't be talking about passwords in 2024, but the fact of the matter is we are still there, and that is sort of still the first the first step into it, into what causes an attack. And not having complex passwords, not having multi-factor authentication, and not just for the students and the staff as well, especially the staff and also the students. And the example we see on the slide there about complex passwords, I come from, well, over the last 10 years, I come from a primary school background. I see and I hear the complaints from members of staff about, getting our year ones and year twos to log in with a complex password with uppercase and lowercase and special characters is an absolute nightmare.
It
But
is. Can confirm.
when you consider the amount that our digital lives live online, and it is the first, effectively your key to your lock, right? That at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to those students to give them the reality of what is, a life skill now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? To think about sort of the different experience in the classroom versus what you're trying to do from your perspective. You talk about that first entry point or that first problem, which is what the staff want to do. They want to get the children access to the technology. We want our students to be able to get on and thrive. You're thinking about all the protection in the background. And this is why the different perspectives are so important to this conversation, to consider the roles and responsibilities and how there needs to be an acknowledgement. You could have done so much work, and then if dog cat 123 is, as I've seen in schools I've worked with, stuck on a post-it on the computer, I mean, I must share, I wouldn't shame, a lovely picture from a school that on social media, and it was a child's birthday. It was nice, and there was a birthday hat, and the picture was on amongst some other pictures, and I could see the Chromebook in the corner of the image with the post-it with the username and password for that device on social media. And it's just those moments that you see that's been to try to solve the problem for quicker access to the device, but the impact of that being on a sticky note on a device can be huge and can make your job very difficult too, right?
And you totally see you totally see and understand the why, right? We all lead extremely stressful lives. We all got an immense mountain of workload that we have to get through day by day. The hours never seem long enough, and so the last thing you want to worry about is that horrible computer that is always too slow and never works when I need it to. And the last thing you want to worry about is the password. And ultimately, there's also a false sense of like, it's not my personal thing, and so therefore it's work related, and we've got an IT team there, and if there's anything that goes wrong, then they'll fix it, won't they? And then we've got backups and stuff. And an analogy I like to give is, just because we've got backups doesn't mean that, in an ideal world, you'll never use those backups. That's like saying, I'm going to go and cut myself because I've got the ointment to put on the cut. And that's not the way life works. The way it works is prevention is better than the cure. And that first step in that security with understanding the passwords and understanding everything that we do, is what effectively will prevent us from getting that attack, or at least best prevent us.
So we're ultimately, we might have different goals, but it's all our roles to play in safeguarding students that they can learn, right? We're two teams with shared interests, with a role to play. So if we think about, we've got yourself as sort of IT working there, and then as the educators. And I think it's really important to consider this and to tackle some of those misconceptions that I think we've addressed now, that cybersecurity is sitting with one part of the team. And the educator's role, and I thought it was interesting, we're talking a lot about AI at the moment, that seems to be all the conversations and the bias. These were generally the images, Abid. When I searched for IT crew and teacher, I was thinking, really, of course, we've got a woman with a blackboard, and there we go, we've got a gentleman with the IT crew t-shirt on. But it's thinking about the different people involved and what their goal and role is in safeguarding our students. And I reflected on my own sort of journey into digital safeguarding and how I best came to understand it. And I've used this analogy to speak to lots of other educators when I'm talking to them about what digital safeguarding is and what it means and what it means when we're working with our students. One of the best analogies I came up with was actually thinking about banking and your phone. So where do your wages go, your money, you keep it safe. You put huge faith in the systems and the security and ensuring that those processes, you probably use online banking. So that's almost like your IT department. They've put all those processes in place. But as an end user, you still need to be very aware of your behavior interacting with that app. So on my phone, I've got Face ID. So I'm thinking about multi-factor authentication. I'm going to double check before making any payments online or before using it. So I haven't just put my faith in the systems in the banking. I've then, as a person, also taken the steps to be secure. I've thought about the processes. And that was the best way I started to sort of break down this analogy of cybersecurity being the processes and cyber safety being the people and the end user and what that looks like. And back to that very early image that looked at IT department, 17%, I think it was, we saw collaborative working. Digital safeguarding in our school settings can only be effective when we've got the processes and the people working together.
It is absolutely a team effort. And, you know, I always say we could spend millions and millions of pounds on building our systems into Fort Knox, but ultimately, when we leave the door open for an attacker to come in, what was the point of all of that security? And it could be anyone who opens that breach. And we say this even when it comes to things like data protection and GDPR. The vast majority of those incidents are not malicious; they are complete accident. And it's interesting what you mentioned about the banking and stuff. This week is Scam Awareness Week, and the BBC have been doing a massive piece on, you know, helping viewers to stay safe and look out for the scams. And the very presenter from that show shared a story on Instagram yesterday, where she was a victim of a scam through her bank, and it wasn't, you know, it's not to say the bank hadn't put all of the systems in place. Of course, they spend millions of pounds on it, but it was purely a social engineering attack. She got a call a call from a scam caller who, you know, masqueraded to be to be from her bank, and she was taken in by it because it was you know, extremely realistic and played on some of her fears and some of the issues that she's experienced. And I think it's really important to share these stories so that we understand, you know, what it looks like from the victim's perspective, look what it looks like from the person in my position, for example, who's looking to put the safeguards in place, and then where that has to sort of marry up and come together. And so everyone is working together to make sure that everything is as safe as possible. Like it's outlined there, I'm putting the process together, and then it's the people part as to how that then works together.
And those sort of critical thinking skills, safe habits, responsive use of technology, we need to see that being built on year after year. I think quite often there's a nod to this, and it could be a day or staff training right at the start of the year and induction, but your pathway and your IT landscape doesn't stay still from the start of the year, does it? You know, you're growing, you're changing, you're iterating. And have we got those regular points and touching base to consider how we're sharing that out with the staff and the community? And that's what you spend a lot of time doing, right, Abid, is getting out there and chatting to educators and sort of spreading the word on the need to have a joined up approach here.
And I do always say, I do always say it's a horrible position to be in sometimes, because you're talking doom and gloom, and we're kind of touching on on that here somewhat. But you just have to look at this September. So, you know, September, when everyone in the UK comes back to school, it's the busiest month for pretty much every department there is in school. And I know of at least 5 instances where schools were forced to close because of a cyber attack. And this is why we're here. This is why we're talking about it. This is why it is so serious, because it affects the entire school community. And that's the reason why people in my position exist in the organization, is because we have to be on top of these threats. We have to be on top of the understanding of the impact that it can have. And then we have to be the ones who then disseminate that information to school leaders so that they understand. You know, we have risk registers. We've had risk registers for years that cover all sorts of risks. An awful lot of that about is about assessment and Ofsted and what happens if we don't meet those thresholds. Well, an awful lot of that now is, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic made us look very differently at our risk register. And it's like, what if we're forced to close because of a global pandemic, right? Likewise, what if we're forced to close because of a cyber attack? And cyber attacks have happened in the most, you know, it's never going to be a case of the cyber attack won't happen when, or it'll be on hold for when Ofsted make the call. No, if the IT doesn't care about, yeah, when I say the IT, the systems don't care about what you've got coming up. The systems are there and they will break, and you will suffer attack or whatever, whenever it feels like it. And it's so important to understand that resilience and how we build that resilience. And I think an awful lot of that comes down to training. And I always say, train your staff, train your staff, train your staff. And I still don't see enough training that we have on IT as a whole, but especially so cybersecurity. We've got the RPA who do instruct schools to make sure all of their staff watch the National Cybersecurity Centre's video every year. That video is 4 years old now, and we have to, and the cybercrime has built an awful lot in that time, and the threat vectors have grown immensely. Yes, there's still some of those basic things to understand about what kind of threats to look for, ransomware, phishing, social engineering, those kind of attacks. But at the same time, we have to understand that in an ever evolving area, we have to constantly keep up with that training, that understanding, that those constant reminders, just like we have safeguarding training every few months, and the constant reminders and looking out for changes in the law and the regulations and requirements. Likewise, we have to keep on top of what's happening in the world of cybersecurity, because it will impact our organization in the most detrimental of ways.
And I think perhaps a missing piece of that with regard to education is also our young people, our students, and educating the students on cybersecurity. So we can think about sort of a dream vision of where we want to get to and what we want to look like. And we're about to delve into some steps and thinking about planning within your school, or thinking about your strategy. But I just wanted to add this in of, I took, you know, you and I working as separate, IT director, you know, leading on teaching and learning, coming together, processes and people. But within that people component, we can't forget our young people. And I don't know if Alicia's just dropped in the chat there for me some information there. I just did a little look on common sense and media and seeing what was out there. And it was really interesting, the definition in its simplest form. I'm reading it here. Cybersecurity is everyone working together to keep our information safe and our computer system secure. You came at the end of the sentence, Abid. What do you think about that? But I did like the fact that it was leading with everybody working together. And that's everyone involved in the school, all staff, all stakeholders, teaching assistants, you know, your admin staff, your teachers, your students, your staff, and starting to think about what that looks like from an early age so we can build on that. And also with our staff knowledge. Like I say, when I first started delving into this space, I really had to stop and reflect. Well, what do I do? What's cybersecurity for me? And that's how I sort of started thinking about the banking analogy. So I'd say we've talked about the problem there. We know some of the risks. You've mentioned there schools closing down in September. We've had some stark figures there with a district cybersecurity attack in the States from our cybersecurity report. So what we wanted to do was make this a really useful session for everyone, where they could start thinking about the solutions and some planning. Now, I know we've got lots of very experienced sort of IT leads who have signed up for this event, and we're certainly not teaching anyone to suck eggs. We want to share. Please, comment in the chat. But what we did in preparation for this is Abid and I, we just thought, okay, well, we can't do a perfect, absolutely everything should be done. What's a good place to start? What would be our sort of top tips? And we came up with these 5 that we want to talk through. And I've got, which I'll share after the session. I started making like a tips and an actions and next steps. So I'll follow up in email. You can perhaps print this off and have a little scribble and a think about what this looks like and what conversations might need to be happening in your setting. But let's start with the first one. And I kind of imagine this could be just part of staff training or even 10 minutes. It's just understanding the role of IT throughout your school setting. And I love that you kind of challenged me, Abid, and said, think about the moment you arrive in school. You might badge in IT. Walk down, first thing you're going to do, get into your room, fire up your computer, IT. And you started to kind of question, think about its use, the integration across all your functions, your dependence on that technology, and kind of the risk of being ignorant to how much of a role IT plays throughout the school.
One thing I always say to senior leaders is IT isn't just like your electricity and gas. IT requires a strategy. Electricity and gas doesn't necessarily require strategy. Maybe you could you could argue with the cost of living crisis, we do need to have a strategy around how we use electricity and gas nowadays. But the fact of the matter is that IT, that it does, and the understanding aspect of knowing what your IT journey through your daily life in school looks like, and not just your daily life in school, but also your daily life in general. Let's rewind back to before we even get to school. When you wake up in the morning, what's the first thing you touch? For most people, that is the smartphone. And then you get up, you'll switch the radio on, you'll maybe switch the TV on. Yeah. And all of these things now rely on the internet connection, the IT. It's ingrained in our lives so much that we forget about it, because you just assume that, the access control on the doors is just a magnet, and your fob or your ID card is just unlocking that magnet. No, it's the permissions that live on a server somewhere that then send the message to and fro to then know who to let in. And so understanding what that entire journey of your life in your day-to-day duties, when you understand how much IT is intertwined into that, and just trying to untangle that web of, what the IT is, you start to realize that I probably couldn't do 80, even as a regular classroom teacher, you probably couldn't do 60, 70, 80% of your job. Like, just see the panic when the internet goes down, or when the interactive whiteboard stops working, or when the projector bulb dies, or when something happens. It's, how am I going to teach? And suddenly you have to flip, and it's not comfortable in any way. And so understanding that role is the biggest first foundational step to understand that, why we have to think of IT as a humongous strategy piece. Because there are plenty of times over the years where I've been to senior leadership meetings and we talk about finance and Ofsted and HR and safeguarding and teaching and learning and all of those key bits and pieces that are, the foundation of what schools are. And then, oh, there's Abid's here today because he needs to give us some messages about IT. And I know it's boring and all that, but if we have 5 minutes at the end, we'll think about it. And then the irony is that without the IT, all of that breaks down.
Yeah.
And so it's about that
It's like that,
massive
it's that
understanding piece.
proportionate planning as well, isn't it? That's why I sort of imagine it as a big piece of paper, or getting all your staff team involved and sort of listing IT and thinking about, I quite like that idea of a percentage or proportionate of your teaching day's reliance on IT, and actually how much thought are you then giving to it, or how much thought are you dedicating to strategy or understanding or education or continued professional development in this space, which is key. And then the second sort of planning piece we put into was to start, so you think about all the IT, but then you start to actually assess the landscape. What tools are being used? What are the risks? Hardware, software, kind of data and privacy. I think a really good connection here with teaching and learning and thinking about the tools that are being risked and used and oversight over what's happening and the impact that it's having in the classroom. Are there tools that are underutilized? Are there tools that actually aren't being used? So you don't necessarily need to have them, because if they're not being used, maybe updates aren't happening and there could be risks. Abid did shame me, everybody, in the week when we jumped on a call and we were talking about security, and he called me out because my Mac said in the corner it was due an update. and we've added that in further down the line. But I do sometimes think in the very busy space, we fail to sometimes assess what's being used, what's not being used, and where those risks could be with the tools.
And we've learnt this quite recently. I work at a very newly merged trust, so we merged two trusts together, and now we're a single institution with a lot more schools working together, and we're trying to pull all of those pieces together. And when you've got 6 different schools that were doing different things, you can see your one school might be using a certain platform and another school is using another platform, and they all do similar things, but it's just which one chose which school chose to use which platform at the same time. And with the ever decreasing budgets that we have, we're having to look at all of those applications and platforms that we're using. One of the things that we always say is, I think one of the early pieces that we need to do is draw up an application landscape, see what applications are actually being used across our organization. Are we doing some form of duplication here and there where we're all trying to, I don't know, let's take MIS system. I know that's probably a very controversial one, but we've got MIS systems in every school, and one school's using MIS A, another one's using B, another one's using E, another one's using Z. It's about bringing all of those together and saying, do we understand what we're putting into those systems, how much we're paying for those systems, what are the data protection requirements behind those systems, how much are we sharing with them, are they GDPR compliant? Even in 2024, we have to understand these things, and then pulling them together and understanding that these are the applications that we have, these are the things that connect with our systems, these are the things that we're sharing data, very, very sensitive student and staff data with the third parties. Have they got their systems in place? Have they got their cybersecurity in place? Have they got all of their industry certifications like ISO 27001 and those things? Are they fully compliant? And building that landscape of understanding what it is that we're doing and all of the systems that are in use is probably the first step in getting towards a better understanding of what it is and how secure we are and where our risks lie.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about that in education all the time, don't we? It's sort of planning, assessment, then you act and you review. And we have those cycles elsewhere that work really effectively across the curriculum, across subjects. And it's actually that good and best practice that we need to see being used across our digital strategy and in IT, because when we put those sort of robust processes in, we're going to be ultimately working with cybersecurity, having really robust security around the IT. And then possibly I should have made that pop front and centre, that educating staff and students on appropriate device use. Now that can start with, for a long time we've had e-safety or e-safety days in schools. I think a lot of schools are moving away from it just being a nod and it being a day, and it's coming into the curriculum as we look at digital literacy and developing those skills. But really important to start thinking about best practice, device use, device care, passwords we've already talked about, secure passwords, student use and device security. For me, those conversations are certainly starting down in primary school and better preparing our young people the world and the real world, and that they're probably doing a lot of this at home and on their devices, and we might not be matching up to the secure passwords or the systems that they have at home, such as multi-factor authentication. What else do you think I want to add to that comment there, Abid?
I think with like you mentioned, with online safety and safer internet day that we've had, historically, it's always been about how we use the internet and the information we share, and do we recognize who we're speaking to, making sure that we understand who they are. And I think a lot of the online safety aspect and cyber security aspect is blending together to become the case of safer internet. Doesn't just mean how we use the internet, but the tools we then engage with to then use the internet, making sure that we understand how we're using those devices and starting to think analogies of what using the internet means in the real world, right? We live in homes. Imagine the home as the World Wide Web, but to get into the home, you have to put your key inside the lock. That's your password, right? And then you might double lock it. That's your multi-factor authentication. You might even have a second door. There's a third step, right, of security, and building into our understanding that this is effectively how we use the internet. It's just we're not seeing it. There's not a physical barrier there. And understanding and building into that education piece that these are the things. Passwords aren't something that are meant to be annoying, right? Just so someone won't copy our work or someone won't see something that is the passwords are our keys to our personal life, right? Just like it's the key to your house. Understanding that is the reason why those things are there, and that's where the training has to constantly be ongoing, regularly, because there are new, at first we used to just talk about passwords, then we started talking about complex passwords, then we started talking about multi-factor authentication. Now we're even talking about passwordless, right? On our phones, we use either fingerprint scanning or Face ID, those kind of things. And these security measures are constantly evolving, and that's where the importance comes in. About
they're even evolving in the guidance, aren't they? I know that we're not there yet, but certainly with keeping children safe in education and DFE standards, we're seeing that coming in now, aren't we? The complex passwords, we need to be meeting those standards. We need to be prepared and to be ahead of the game here and see this coming. That is met with the complication of younger students, which we've talked about, but I think it's coming that it certainly will be statutory. Yeah.
100%. And I think that leads on to nicely to like the critical updates piece, because we all hate updates and they happen at the worst possible time. I always love joining a Zoom meeting and it's like, yeah, you can't join this meeting until you've updated your version of Zoom. You need to, Windows updates are forever happening. I've had many arguments with school leaders in the past to say you can't do updates during term time, you must do them during the term holidays. That's not how cyber attacks work. That's not how the criminals work. They won't just wait for the holiday to attack you. Updates, and I was having this argument with someone at work yesterday. Have you updated your latest your iPhone to iOS 18? No, I haven't done it yet. Why? Well, because I heard it changes the layout of your phone, and I'm like, somewhat, yes. But at the same time, updates are not always cosmetic, right? They're there because they are patching flaws and bugs in the system. That's
an education piece as well, because you talked to me about that and you said if you're not updating, it's most likely security. The updates are most likely linked to security. And that again was a point. You're in that space. I wonder how many people within a school setting would have that knowledge to know the update is actually security settings, particularly on phones. Loads of people don't update their phones because they don't want a font to change, or they don't want something to move slightly, or the clock becomes a little bit bigger. That's almost a byproduct. The update on the iPhone that's happening, right, is to keep us safe and secure.
And that is ultimately the main thing, and you know why it comes back to the education, to understand that updates again are there for a reason. They're not just there to try and sell you a new device. Yes, there is an aspect of that because they contain fancy new features to, and ultimately these companies want to make the money, but at the same time they have that responsibility to keep their users safe, and that's why the updates are constantly happening. You know, people always are, oh, what version of I am running iOS 18.0, but do you know there's an iOS 18.1.1 and there's an iOS 18.1.2 or whatever, and then next month there's an iOS 18.2, and it's like, oh, I can't keep up. And this is the thing though, is that, you know, probably the one device that we all use the most in our lives is our smartphone. And it's imperative to keep this as up to date as possible for those very reasons, because we engage with that device the most. And the criminals know this, right? They know that people are using their devices. And so therefore they are heavily actively working to look for flaws in the software so they can exploit people.
Yeah.
And that's why it's imperative to understand that, you know, you'll see many a tabloid newspaper article saying the newest version of iOS slows down your iPhone, so don't install it. Wait for Apple to fix the bugs that slow down your phone. And it's simply put, it's just not true. If you're boring enough to go and read the complete guide to what is included in the latest update, you'll see the vast majority of it is security patches, especially the 0.1.1.1 updates and things like that. Those are very small updates, but they're patching critical flaws. There's nothing of cosmetic change there at all whatsoever. But that's what everyone sort of, it comes back to change. I hate change, and
But
I don't want to, I don't want it to impact on the things that I'm used to.
yeah. And it's that fear of change in the classroom. You know, you're hugely busy, you know your tabs. In fact, we were on another call and I updated Google and then I was like, my tabs have gone. And that was enough to put somebody off. I'm not updating next time, because you've saved student tabs, lessons, you've got your running order of your day, and that's so crucial. But there was a workaround, of course, and you showed me to use the three dots in Chrome and bring it all back. But these are the touch points, the micro learning. It doesn't need to be a huge front-ended cybersecurity at the start of the year and we don't return to it. Little notes, you're due an update, remember this is security, it keeps us cyber secure. You need to do it, because you said you regulate in different school settings and it's there in the corner of the screen. The devices need an update and that makes us vulnerable. And then finally, we talked about policies and procedures, but we really started to focus in on responsibilities in our conversation. And we talked about, again, if we're going to have this collaborative approach, who do we need in the team? Who do we need in the policies as we're thinking about cybersecurity? And even does that accountability fall into governance and within your governors? Can you have somebody accredited? There's some good guidance out there. Again, it's not statutory that I'm saying this should be done. We're talking about best practice and where we want to get to, and to have those touch points in your policies and procedures, to have that regular training for all the stakeholders and students.
And I think that pretty much defines where we have to have that those responsibilities, is they have to come from top down, because ultimately, if you were to have a cyber attack, it will bring your organization to a grinding halt. That's not something you can just brush under the carpet. You know, senior leaders will be asked straight away, why can't you open your school? What have you done to mitigate these circumstances? Where's your business continuity plan? Have you made sure that people knew what the risks are? Did you deliver the training? These are the questions that the RPA will ask, and they do require everyone has had the training. Have you documented that they've had the training? Do you understand what's going on? They require the governance aspect of it. So you've got trustees and governors in schools, then you have to have a responsibility there at the trustee and governor level to make sure that they are challenging the school to understand, are you understanding the risks with cybersecurity? Are you then doing what you can? What are you doing to mitigate these circumstances? Because I think it's scary to hear, but I think for the vast majority of organizations in the world, it's a case of not if you have a cyber attack, but when you have a cyber attack. And then what are you going to do to recover from that? How resilient are you? And I think these policies and procedures and understanding have to come from top down. You have to have that. If you're a multi-academy trust, for example, you have to have that responsibility at trust level. You have to have that responsibility at local governance level. You have to have that responsibility at senior leadership level within the organization. And then the IT teams will play part to then collaborate with all of those individual teams. But you see, the more and more people that you have involved at senior level to have that understanding, the more there is, you can show that you have challenged the situation, you have challenged the threats, and you have made sure that you've put the effort in to make it such that we are in the best possible circumstance as possible to make sure that we are keeping as safe and as secure as possible.
Super, thank you. So as I said, I'm going to follow up and make sure everybody has, there you go, I'll move this to the screen. We've got some tips, kind of the 5 steps that Abid and I spoke through there, what you can think about within your setting to have a cohesive approach to security, and also some areas that you can work through and create a script there. I clicked ahead. It's too key. It's really interesting. I don't know if anyone noticed during that my Chromebook here timed out, and this is a clever badge, which I'm just going to take a moment to talk to you. So I had to badge in there as a secure setting, thinking about that. So it's been really interesting to think about those steps, Abid, and hopefully I have seen the chat going. I don't know, Anisha, if there have been any questions, or if they have, Abid, or if it's people saying that they had to shoot off. Like we said, it was a busy.
Yeah, a couple of really good points, Tara. Somebody's saying, is training not more successful if you can use it in your personal life? So that whole idea of making them feel they're not just being told things that are useful in a work context. And then another good point, which I think we could talk all day about, is do you think trustees really understand their responsibilities?
Was that a raised eyebrow, Alicia?
Well, I think it's quite a hard question to answer, and it's hard to generalize as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard question to answer. And I do think one of the conversations that we've had previously, and if we went back to that very first slide, I think one of the, I need to be careful how this phrase it, IT have always been, well, we can fall back and IT are leading on cybersecurity. And that's kind of been a way to think about responsibilities, but actually we've seen changes to that. There are changes in keeping children safe in education. Your designated safeguarding lead has to be all over this, aware of cybersecurity. We saw the updates this year in keeping children safe online, actually in school and extending within to the home. So there, I think there's another argument to really think about where cybersecurity and digital literacy fits within your curriculum. So I think the responsibility, great question whoever asked it, isn't as well known as it should be. And forward planning, I think, certainly to next academic year and thinking about onboarding staff training and longer term planning, where we all have roles in this, I think we need to have some secure staff training linked to this. And I know how schools work. We're probably all next half term and the term after, but certainly following those steps to start planning that education piece and link that then to step 5, which was the roles, policies and procedures. But yeah, maybe you'll have to organise another webinar, Alicia. We'll keep you busy.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll get into that one. We'll get into responsibilities. But I did just want to finish up. Really appreciate the conversation, Abid, with just a little word on Clever. And if anybody's a little bit more interested in knowing what we do and how we can help in a lot of the areas we've been talking about, because many of the challenges we've highlighted today, they happen when identities aren't secure, and kind of connecting identities and data systems within your setting. That's what we do best at Clever. Each digital identity is a real person in the community for our staff, our teachers, our students and our parents. And with a unified digital identity from Clever, that can ensure that people have access to the right resources and also minimal data sharing and use. So I've got a little video as well to just show you about kind of the tool and how we've mentioned a few times there, MFA and multi-factor authentication. that will be another webinar, Alicia, talking about that. Second devices, a lot of schools are banning phones, so that makes it complicated. Anecdotally, my son is in a school with a phone ban. First day in the classroom, setting up his Teams account, he had to get out his phone about 3 times to authenticate, and it was interesting. But he's all set up now. He's just about got there. But again, huge part of the work we do at Clever is encouraging digital citizenship, cybersecurity awareness from an easy age, and layering that security from very early, using a badge, adding in emojis, PIN codes, passwords. So if you will allow me to just play this for a few moments. You got the sound?
Classrooms are not equipped to use current enterprise MFA solutions. For example, many students do not have or are not allowed to have mobile phones in the classroom. Here is how Clever is solving this challenge for students of different ages and teachers in the classroom. Younger students use login pictures and badges for classroom MFA. They use their Clever badge for the first factor. Then they select their login animal and login food as a second factor to get access to their Clever portal without ever needing to type. Older students use username and password plus badges for classroom MFA. They type in their username and password for the first factor. Then they use their badge as a second factor to get access to their Clever portal. This provides the security that today's digital classrooms need, while not sacrificing the ease of access students need for digital learning, all while being fun and loved by elementary students in the classroom.
Yeah, that was genuinely like at the end of their session, and a word from our sponsor, wasn't it? So sorry everybody, but thank you. It is, we're doing some great stuff with Clever, and I'm showing my whole screen now. How very not for cyber secure of me. And if anybody would like a chat, please do. Have you dropped, there's a link for Pete, my colleague, Calendly, or some of you will already know Pete. Drop that in the chat, or any other questions. We can kind of open that to the group now.